Hello guys, this is part 131 of ASP.NET video tutorial. In this video, we will discuss about cache dependency on SQL Server database table. Let's understand that with an example. Let's flip to SQL Server Management Studio. Here is the SQL Server Management Studio. Here it is. I have this table products here, which has got some sample data. I want to display this. I want to display this data in my ASP.NET web application. In this grid view control, and that should happen when I click this button, get data. So here I have what happened here. Okay, I have already this button click event there. I need to see once again, this is the source. Let me show you the source. Okay, we have double clicked that. If I remove this, let me remove this. And copy this for a second. And remove this, because we want to generate the button click event handler. So again double click here. So this is the button click event, and paste that the coding which we have deleted earlier. So here I have straightforward edu.NET code. The first line here actually reads the connection string. The first line here actually reads the connection string from web.config file, which is pointing to SQL Server that is installed on my local machine. And then we are creating SQL connection object, using that connection string. And then preparing SQL data adapter, and then preparing SQL data adapter object. Look at the command here. Look at the command here. We are retrieving all the products from table TBL product. We are retrieving all the products from TBL products table, and then we are creating an instance of the data set, and then we are creating an instance of the data set object, filling data set with the data, that we get after we execute this command, Okay, at this point we have this, at this point we have this data set, which we are then caching using the cache object insert method, and then we are setting the data set, as data source for the grid view control. Calling the data bind method. And finally we are displaying this message. Data retrieved from database at the date and time at which we have done that in this label control. So pretty straightforward code, but then if you look at this code as it stands now, every time we click this button, it is going to connect to the database, execute that command, retrieve the data, cache it, and then set that as a data source. Invoke data bind method. We do not want that to be happening. If the data set is there already in cache, we want to retrieve the data from cache rather going and executing the command against database. Okay, and just to speed things up, I have that coded already. So let me copy that. Means go to the notepad and copy this code and paste it here. And paste that here. So if you look at this code, what we are doing, we are checking. Okay, in cached, we have products data. If that is the case, go ahead and retrieved it from cache. Set that as data source. For the grid view control. Invoke data bind. and the display a message, and then display a message in the label control stating that data is retrieved from cache and the date time at which we have done that. Let's go ahead and close this else block. Close this else block. Okay, so basically we are retrieving this data. So basically we are retrieving this data from TBL products table, and caching that within an ASP.NET web application. But remember, what I want to do is, once we have cached that, anytime if anybody changes the data, if this data changes for any reason, then I want the data to be removed from cache immediately. Is that possible? Absolutely. And there are 3 simple steps to achieve that. Okay, so what is step 1? Okay, so what is step 1? What is step 1? Where is my presentation slide? Okay, something went wrong. I have to go to my Word here. Okay, this is the presentation slide. Okay, so what is the step 1? Enable change notification on the database. Step 1, enable change notification on the database. So what do we mean by enable change notification? So what do we mean by enable change notification? Now look at this. At the moment we have, now look at this. Go to the Visual Studio. Now look at this. At the moment we have, executed this command. Okay, now look at this. At the moment we have, executed this command, retrieve the data and cache that. That is fine. But then when the data changes, SQL Server should notify ASP.NET web application about that change. so that the ASP.NET web application can remove that data from cache. Okay, so to notify those change notification, we should enable that on the SQL Server database and then on that table as well. So here the database is sample3. So here the database is, look at here. So here the database is sample3 database and the table is TBL products and table is TBL products. So we should enable change notification on this database sample3 and table TBL products. And there are two ways to do that. We can either do that programmatically using SQL cache dependency admin, using SQL cache dependency admin class, which has got this enable notification, static method, and to enable table for notification, and to enable table for notification, we have corresponding static method. Okay, so we can either do that programmatically in code using this SQL cache dependency admin class. Okay, or we can also use this command, or we can also use this command line, or we can also use this command line tool, ASP.NET _ register SQL.exe. And obviously, since this is a command line tool, we can run that in Visual Studio command prompt. So to open Visual Studio command prompt, so let me minimize these. So to open Visual Studio command prompt, click on Start. Click on Start. Visual Studio 2022 folder. Click this, and here you can see now under this Visual Studio 2022 folder, you can see developer command prompt for Visual Studio. So open it, run as administrator. Okay, so once we have that command prompt opened, then you need to execute these commands that you can see here. There are two commands. Where the two commands? Go to the presentation slide. There are two commands. The first command here is the first command here is like this: ASP.NET _ register SQL. So go to the notepad. Here is the notepad. So let me copy that. Here it is, the command. The first command here, copy it. And paste it here. Okay. So let me paste that there. So ASP.NET ASP.NET _ register SQL, and then there are some switches, and then there are some switches here. Hyphen ed. Hyphen ed means enable database for change notification. Basically, if you want to understand what these switches mean, you can use /? /? And then it will show you all the help there. Okay. So here you can basically see hyphen ed. Where is the hyphen ed? Here. So here you can see basically hyphen ed means enable a database for SQL cache dependency. Okay. That is what this option means. And then there is something called hyphen e. And then there is something called hyphen e. What does that mean? That means since we are making a change to SQL Server database, you need to obviously authenticate yourself. You need to obviously authenticate yourself. When I specify hyphen e, I am saying use my window authentication. On the other hand, if you don't have window authentication and you want to use your explicit username and password, on the other hand, if you don't have Windows authentication and you want to use your explicit username and password, you can do that using hyphen u and hyphen p. Hyphen u for username and then specify your logging, and then hyphen p for your password, and then specify your password. So you can either authenticate yourself using SQL Server authentication, or Windows authentication. So if you want to authenticate yourself with Windows credential, you use -e, just like how I have done that. And -d stands for -d stand for the name of the database. So in my case, the database name is going to be sample3. So I'm going to copy this command. So I'm going to copy this command and paste it here. Here you can see, here I am using -s. That is the server name of my visual of my SQL Server Management Studio. So this is the server name. Okay. So I am using this also, -s server name, and that is the SQL Server name. That is the my computer name also. That is the database sample3. Okay. And I pasted it in this tool, ASP.NET_register SQL, and then press enter. Now press enter. Enabling the database for SQL cache dependency. Enabling the database for SQL cache dependency, and it says finished. Okay, so we have just enabled the entire database. But then in that database I have a table called TBL products, on which I have to enable that. So I'm going to copy another command. This is the second command. And then paste that here. And then paste that here. Press enter. An error has occurred. Why error occurred? Because I am using sample3. It should be, this is not sample. So again, so my database is sample3. So okay, now it will run. Okay. So enabling the table for SQL cache dependency. And it says finished. So we are done. Let minimize it. So we are done. So first step is enable change notification on the database. enable change notification on the database. And remember, there are two ways to do that. You can either do that programmatically in code using SQL cache dependency admin class, or you can use ASP.NET, ASP.NET, or you can use ASP.NET underscore register SQL.exe tool. All right. What is the second step? What is the second step? Let me go down. What is the second step? We need to build a SQL cache dependency object. We need to build SQL cache dependency object. Okay, and that is straightforward. And that is straightforward. Straightforward to do. And that is straightforward to do. All you need to do is create an instance of this class. Create an instance of this class SQL cache dependency. So I'm going to do that here. And obviously when we create an instance, go to the Visual Studio. So I'm going to do that here. And obviously when we create an instance of this class, so SQL cache dependency, SQL cache dependency. So SQL cache dependency, let's call that SQL dependency. Let's call that SQL dependency is equal to new SQL cache dependency. SQL cache dependency. And look at the constructor. You can specify the database name. You can specify the database name and table name. You can specify the database name and table name. So here the database is sample3 and the table is TBL products. So here the database is sample3 and the table is TBL products. So that is what I am going to specify here. So we have specified sample3 is the database and the table is TBL products. Okay, so we have the SQL cache dependency. So we have the SQL cache dependency object. Now I can use this overloaded version. Now I can use this overloaded version if I want, but I can use another simple overloaded version which take just 3 parameter. We just take three parameter. We just take 3 parameter, the cache key, the data, I want to cache, and the cache dependency, and the cache dependency object. Look at this. Here the object is cache dependency. Here the object is cache dependency, but my object that I am passing into this method as a parameter is SQL cache dependency object. Is it possible to be done? Absolutely, because if you look at SQL cache dependency, if you look at SQL cache dependency, if you look at SQL cache dependency, that actually inherits from cache dependency. That actually inherit from cache dependency class. So you can pass it as an inherited type. So you can pass it as an inherited type. So I'm going to pass the SQL dependency object. So that is the second step. So I'm going to pass the SQL dependency object. So that is the second step. SQL dependency. Okay. So that is the second step. Okay. Prepare your SQL cache dependency object. Prepare your SQL cache dependency object, and then pass it to the insert method, and then pass it to the insert method when you are caching the data, so that the cache data knows there is a SQL dependency. Okay, so that is our second step. What is this third step? What is the third step? Third step is in, what is the third step? Third step is in web.config file, we need to specify SQL cache dependency setting. in web.config file, we need to specify SQL cache dependency. Okay, so again, just to speed things up, I have that already typed in. So let me copy that. Go to the notepad and copy that. And go to the web.config file and paste it here. So we have copy pasted the caching in the web.config file. Let's flip to Visual Studio. So here I have web.config file. So if you look at the connection string, the name of the connection string is db connection string. The name of the connection string is db connection string, which is pointing to SQL Server that is installed on my local machine. This is the local machine. You can specify the dot symbol here. This is my name, computer name, where the SQL Server is installed on my local machine, and then I'm going to have this caching setting, and then I am going to have these caching setting under system.web node. I have this caching element. And within that I have SQL cache dependency, and within that I have SQL cache dependency. Look at this, enabled is equal to true. Look at this, enable is equal to true. Obviously that's mean we have enabled SQL cache dependency, and the important thing to notice here is the poll time, which is set to 2000. Now this time is actually in milliseconds. Since I have set this time to 2000, it means 2 seconds. Basically. So every 2 seconds, ASP.NET, application is going to check with SQL Server. Are there any changes to that, table, basically? Within that sample 3. Database. So that is what this poll time means. Now this is optional. Meaning if you don't specify poll time, the default is 500 milliseconds. Meaning every half second, that is the frequency at which ASP.NET application will poll the database to check for any changes for that database table. Okay, and obviously we have this database element, where we are where we are specifying name as sample3, and connection string is that one, and connection string is that one. Okay, cool. So those are the three steps. So those are the three steps. So those are the three steps. We are done. We have now established a SQL cache dependency. So let me go ahead and run this now. Save the files. Run this now. Control F5. As soon as the web application loads, when we click that button, get data, it should execute that command, retrieve data, and load that into cache. Okay, so data retrieved from database at this time. So data retrieved from database at this time. So now every time I click this button, it is going to retrieve data from cache. So now every time I click this button, it is going to retrieve data from cache. So it is going to this data set. This data set is going to stay in cache. This data set is going to stay in cache, until it has been changed. So I click that, I still get it from cache. So I click that, I still get it from cache. But look at this. The moment I go and change this data in the database, but look at this. The moment I go and change this data in the database, so at the moment, if you look at this laptop is laptop. At the moment, the laptop is laptop. So I am going to update that to laptop 1. So I am going to update this to laptop 1. Press Control F5. One row affected. Now look at this. As soon as I say get data, now look at this. As soon as I say get data, data retrieved from database at that time. Data retrieved from database at that time. Okay. So the data that was already cached is removed from cache. So the data that was already cached is removed from cache because ASP.NET application detected the data has changed. So now, no matter how many times I click, it is going to retrieve from cache unless somebody else is going to change the data again. So if I click now, so now no matter how many times I click, it is going to retrieve from cache unless somebody else is going to change the data again. So let me change this once again back to laptop. So let me again change this back to laptops and see what is going to happen. And see what is going to happen. Okay, we are done. Okay, we are done. And now let me click this. And now let me click this. Here you can see laptop once. And when I click this, look at that, you can see laptop is changed back to laptops. One is changed back to laptops. And then we got data from database. So anytime the data in the database table changes, the data is removed from cache, and we have done that using SQL cache dependency. Three simple steps. Steps to do that. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.